order this evening's council meeting. Clerk, will you take the roll, please?
Mayor Brinkman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Valdez. Councilmember Cole.
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll. Here. Councilmember Fay.
Here.
Councilmember Elrod. Councilmember Schlachter.
Here.
Will you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Looks like we have a scout in the audience. Would you like to lead us in the pledge?
That's all right. I'm honest.
He's honesty.
All right.
I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I like decisive answers. I
Was
don't
it?
care.
He was
Want
quick.
to? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I didn't come here to do that.
I'll table that indefinitely.
Okay, go ahead.
Call ahead next time you come and we'll get you scheduled in, okay?
Talent show the whole thing.
Okay, council, any changes to the agenda?
No.
Seeing none, we move to public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for the public to come down and address the council. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. The City Council is not authorized by the Colorado Open Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at the meeting on any issue raised by public comment that is not part of tonight's agenda. The mayor may refer the matter to staff to obtain additional information and report back as appropriate. Is there a sign-up sheet?
Hey, Mark.
Pam Chadbourne?
Good evening, Council. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. Last week, I mentioned that I have more confidence in what Littleton is than I think has been reflected by actions of the city in the past several years. And I said that, or maybe I didn't and all I had, that the city code that we have, much maligned by people because it's quote, quote, old, has resulted in the good bones that person after person has acknowledged in the city that citizen after citizen has said they love and have told you that they love and that they want to keep. So I'm saying that our old code and our old land use map has virtues. I'm also going to say that our city planning process has completely skipped over any step of looking at the virtues and weaknesses of our existing land use plan. Instead, we should junk it. We're going to replace it with a future land use plan without evaluation of the weaknesses and failures of what we have now. And what I've seen pretty much dooms the city that people say they love and the character of the city that people say they love. So let me point out one thing that I saw that has been skipped in our process as an example, and that is form-based zoning. So the Bellevue Quarter Plan, which is supposed to be copied now in our comp plan process, and it's actually a vision, I think we called it, or framework, not a plan, used form-based zoning for the Columbine Square replacement. We've never, as a city, and I've been paying attention, had a discussion of the pros and cons of form-based, use-based, or a mixture of those and how that's used or applied. We do have general talks with specific offerings, but those are not adequate for the decisions the citizens and the decision makers are trying to make. We need a thorough and appropriate management process for making these decisions, and that includes examination of alternatives and the weaknesses and strengths of those alternatives, the risks and mitigations and costs, and then we can choose, and we haven't been doing that. So I'm just going to iterate that and say our comp plan process, I think, is broken. So I'd like it to be interrupted and fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Don Burns?
Can I wait till you hand those out before you start my clock? The reason why is, as Jerry has explained, I talk too fast, so I want to wait till you have your copies of what I want to have to say.
Do talk fast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Don Bruns, District 4. It was good to hear Brett Keith's presentation on May 22nd on community character, and that got me thinking. Just by way of context, I have a couple of observations. The Littleton Plans.org website tells of many completed community engagement efforts. As has been explained, I understand the 2,959 conversations shown on your site surpasses that of other municipalities' outreach efforts. Good. Yet, at 6.6% of Littleton's population, this means that the city hasn't yet heard from more than 93% of its citizenry. Second, 2 maps were displayed on May 22nd, substantially different. The existing character map shows thousands of homes in southern suburban neighborhoods as out-of-urban. At least we thought they were suburban all along. The good news is that these areas are now depicted as suburban in a future character working draft. But when that second map was presented to council by KKC, they noted it could change, which begs 2 questions. The first is, if and when specific citizen community character desires will be assessed. Because citizen output obtained thus far appears to be undifferentiated in terms of specific desired community character conditions. The second question is how and why future community character classifications will be kept or changed. Is it only for places marked as areas for discussion on a third map or elsewhere also? For example, why might such future character classifications be changed? Under what conditions? Who would initiate such changes? Have the grounds for making such changes been determined? How will the positive and negative effects of such changes be determined? What assurances have citizens that factors such as these will actually be fully considered? Why does all this matter? I've seen 2 very different kinds of public involvement in my land use planning career. The first met public involvement requirements but was largely perfunctory because it only engaged public opinion en masse without differentiation by public and place. In that regard, it was akin to Envision Littleton engagement, but just thus far. So to understand people's real character and outcome desires, we had to approach them using iterative dialogue and an objective description classification framework along the spectrum. Yes, we had a similar framework. Only then did we learn what each distinct public actually wanted place by place, and also why they thought it was so important to maintain certain character conditions and avoid others to achieve desired end results. Will council ensure both questions are answered? I hope so. I know you're not allowed to answer now, but I hope you let us know, because it seems clear that not everyone wants the same conditions in every place, not even all of council itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. I don't have anybody else signed up, but if someone would like to speak, you can raise your hand and come down. Okay, seeing no one, we'll close the public comment and move to consent agenda. The consent agenda items can be adopted by a simple motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to a vote on the motion, and any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member. Ordinance 18. This is a first introduction of an ordinance amending ordinance number 39, series of 2018, known as the Annual Appropriations Bill, for all municipal purposes of the city of Littleton, counties of Arapahoe, Douglas, and Jefferson, state of Colorado, for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2019, and ending December 31, 2019. ID 19146 is a motion to cancel City Council's regular meeting on June 18, 2019. ID 19-149 is a motion to approve authority, board, and commission appointments. Ordinance 17-2019, first introduction of an ordinance approving the city's participation in the Metro Mortgage Assistance Plus program and authorizing the execution of the delegation and participation agreement. Resolution 30 is authorizing a second amendment to the intergovernmental agreement with South Suburban Park and Rec District and the Centennial Water and Sanitation District for management, operations, and maintenance of the South Platte Reservoir site to allow memorial benches along the walking trail. Item ID 19143 is approval of the May 21, 2019 regular meeting minutes. I need a motion.
Mayor?
We have a motion. I need a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ready to vote?
The vote is, my mic's not working. The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Okay, we have nothing under general business, so we'll move to our ordinance on second reading and public hearing. This is an ordinance 16-2019. This is second introduction of an ordinance amending the city code, Title 10, Chapters 1 and 7 regarding site development plans. So we'll have a staff presentation. Looks like the deputy city manager. I'm sorry, I just can't stop. We can't. The acting, just
Yeah.
can't stop. Okay.
I
Go
asked the
ahead.
deputy city manager to install a buzzer on my chair for such occasions. But thank you, Mayor and members of council. Good evening. My name is Mike Sutherland. I am the Deputy Director for Community Development. And I have a brief presentation on this proposed site development plan ordinance. This has had a long history. It went to a joint study session of City Council on January 22nd of this year. We had a draft published to the website shortly before the Planning Commission meeting, and then a Planning Commission hearing on April 22nd, 2019. And the first reading was May 21st, 2019, and here we are at the second reading. In way of background, the current code has one type of site development plan that we process. It is an administrative site development plan. Doesn't matter how any of the characteristics of the property or development. It is just a one-size-fits-all type process. There is no appeal for citizens currently, and only the applicant may appeal the administrative decision to the Planning Commission. And then the Planning Commission, in the case of an appeal, has the final decision. In the study session that you conducted with Planning Commission, some of the goals were to define major and minor types of site development plans and distinguish between those that had more impacts upon surrounding properties and those that might have less, and to allow citizens to appeal major site development plans, but continue our administrative process for minor site development plans or ones that we anticipate might have less impact. Staff in the process had a couple of additional goals to remove the process for conceptual site development plans, which I think was always intended to be replaced by our pre-application meetings, which have been pretty successful with the development community so far. And also to make minor adjustments to the site development plan process to allow greater application of sketch plans and plot plans for very minor cases. In the proposed amendment, major site development plans are defined as any industrial development that's greater than 10,000 square feet in area, which, I think with industrial development, you'd have a lesser threshold because industrial development can have greater impacts to surrounding neighbors. Also, multifamily developments greater than 8 units would require a major site development plan. Any commercial greater than 30,000 square feet, and that's different than industrial development. And any development of land greater than 10 acres in size. The proposed amendment, the appeals process for the proposed amendment, as I said earlier, minor site development plans would have the same appeal processes as currently implemented, or as currently available today. Major site development plans could be appealed by either the applicant or property owners within 300 feet of the development of property. The Planning Commission did have, and I'll go over these recommendations in a bit, but on your screen, it shows the original proposal was within 10 days of the decision of the administrative decision would be the appeal period, and Planning Commission recommended 20 days. And so that's why we have 20 in red on the screen and 10 crossed out. And then with the Planning Commission, it would be an administrative hearing, basically, and they would have the final decision. So that administrative hearing is intended to say that rather than a public hearing, or rather than reopening the entire site development plan, the Planning Commission would look at the specific appeal and the specific criteria and decide whether that had merit or not. And then review criteria. We've suggested some new review criteria for these major and minor site development plans. As I said earlier, the Planning Commission did hold their public hearing and recommended approval with the following 4 conditions. One would be to add to the submittal requirements, and that was we added those into your draft to define a final decision date, and that would be when the developer produces the receipts for certified mail to those property owners. That would begin the 20-day appeal period, and that would be a date specific. Then also the third condition would we've talked about would be to allow a 20-day appeal period instead of a 10-day appeal period. Fourth condition would be to exclude right-of-way and easements from the 300-foot notification range. As you'll note on the screen, I crossed out and put in red easements. Staff would recommend that it just be right-of-way, because if you go to the assessor's record, we don't have a record of where easements are or the widths are. It could be very difficult to implement. We'd suggest that it just be right-of-way, and I think that probably, I hate to speak for the Planning Commission, I think that was sort of their intent, but the wording of it with easements could be particularly difficult for both the staff and applicant. And staff recommends approval of the proposed ordinance, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Pat?
Mike, do we have a formal process in place for a citizen or a group to appeal the decision?
Right now, the decision of the administrative decisions for site development plans, we do not have a process for citizen appeal. And I believe it has been, that question has been explored in the past. And I believe that we found that the citizens didn't have standing to appeal under our current code. And that's one reason for the proposed amendment.
So if somebody were to want to appeal, how would they go about doing that?
Currently, if the site development plan were approved administratively,
They sue. They sue us.
Yeah, I guess they could sue us through the court system, would be the only method right now.
Is there a way to keep us out of a lawsuit? Can we put some verbiage around this?
I'm sorry.
Is there a way to keep us out of a lawsuit? And can we put some verbiage around appeal process?
So there, and I'll let Ken jump in if I misspeak, or I should say Mr. Feldman, jump in if I misspeak, but right now, with the proposed ordinance, they would have the ability to have an appeal for the major site development plans. And also that would, I believe the ordinance spells out that any decision by the Planning Commission could be appealed through the court system.
Yeah,
Councilmember Schlechter.
a couple of questions here. One, I wanted to read a question by one other council member that was responded to us. I thought it was a good question. Can you give us some examples of major and minor SDPs, specifically in the past that may be major moving forward but weren't in the past?
Certainly. So recent site development plans that have been approved, of those, the Grove, which is a familiar project, would be a major site development plan. Also, most of the projects that have happened for residential projects, most of the residential development in Littleton Village would be considered a major site development plan. That includes the Amley developments, those types of projects. Also, the apartments on Nevada Street, which are the Littleton Crossing apartments, would be a major site development plan and could be appealed by surrounding, if this process were in place at the time that they were approved, could have been appealed by a citizen within, or a property owner within 300 feet. Examples of site development plans that would be minor in nature would be several of the new developments in the downtown area that are single lot or 2-lot developments are typically under the 8-unit threshold, and those would be considered minor site development plans and would be could only be appealed by the applicant in case of denial. Commercial projects, the Littleton mixed use on Main Street would be a major site development plan. The Republic National Distribution Company expansion that is just finishing right now would be considered a major site development plan under these standards. Examples of commercial developments that would be considered minor would be the recently approved Starbucks at Woodlawn would be considered minor because it falls under that 30,000 square foot threshold. Also, the Culver's restaurant in Littleton Village would be considered a minor site development plan. And those are a few examples. There's many others.
Thanks for that. As far as the appeal process goes, how would that appeal be presented to, assuming there's an appeal, presented to Planning Commission? I know it's not a public hearing since it's an administrative hearing or process, but would the applicant or the appellate, the person that's appealing, be presenting their case? Would staff be doing that? Would staff be providing a recommendation of approval or denial of appeal?
We would have to kind of ferret some of this out with an appeal, but my anticipation is that the appellant would be allowed to give a presentation. There is in the current ordinance the ability for the property owner whose site development plan is being appealed to have a response period to the appeal. And I would expect that staff would have a recommendation. There would have to be the appellant would have to identify specific criteria that they are appealing. Could be one, it could be all. those criteria and address those to the Planning Commission. And I suspect that staff would have a recommendation based on the appellant's material and the applicant's response.
Thank you.
Peggy?
Yeah. It sounds like this is mainly in terms of size of something, like this versus this, the way you were talking about it. But what about putting in something not all that big next to an iconic place in Littleton? I think it theoretically would be possible if something were torn down near the courthouse on the same side of on the north side, that you could erect something that just about everybody in Littleton would go ballistic about. So this seems awfully squiggly. I mean, tough to get a handle on, and somebody might appeal, but how that would get judged is really slippery.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember Cole, for that observation. That's definitely a concern. I think part of the development of the ordinance, we recommended some new approval criteria. That approval criteria, just because a development might meet the letter of the code standards, the approval criteria would allow both staff and Planning Commission on small or large cases to look at the character of the community, the surrounding community, and make a decision with that in mind. So I think it gives the new proposed review criteria help address that type of situation and give both staff and the Planning Commission greater flexibility in what they can look at with a proposed site development plan. And I think in the recent past, sometimes staff felt obligated, if it met the strict standards of the zoning regulations or that type of thing, to approve a site development plan. And this would allow some flexibility to look at the surrounding development. And
Well, then that sounds more like, depending on who happens to be employed in a particular position, or who's on the planning board, or who's on whatever, to be deciding some things rather than giving some kind of direction with some attempt at defining. That's one of the comments that one of the that's in our packet. I thought about this myself, and then I'm reading the sidebars, and I'm seeing, well, somebody else has this concern. I think we need to do better on this.
yeah,
I'm not whapping you on the head. I just think we need to try, while we're doing it, we need to do better.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that with this proposed amendment, we are trying to walk a very fine line to give citizens more input on the development process. Certainly, we read those comments as well, and I think the development process has some natural uncertainties for a developer. We want to try and minimize those. But as you said, there might be a small development that's near an iconic structure that, all the development regulations in the world maybe didn't anticipate this particular type of development. And I don't think it's the intent for staff to use that frequently to say, well, you meet all the standards, but gosh, this is such a peculiar development that we're not going to approve it. I don't think it's the intent to use that frequently, but sort of as a final backstop, I guess, for public involvement. And with other communities, sometimes site development plans go all the way to city council, and they're heard by several different boards and commissions in between. So I don't think that Littleton's process right now or proposed process for these site development plans is particularly unusual in the region.
But if it might come to us, but if we don't have something that, other than, hey, this is what I want, I mean, we've been through that a little bit, at least once since I was on council, and probably once just before I first got elected to council. It was...
Councilmember Cole, if you are interested in making an amendment later to help appease your concern, we would entertain that amendment after the public comment.
We're not.
Sherry.
Or not. I'm not prepared right now to do that. I mean, it's I tried to figure it out, and it seemed to me that we needed to bounce with each other more, maybe in a study session on this. I'm sorry, I'm not being more helpful here.
Oh, no, not at all. I think that's council's discretion. If they want to, if council is not ready to do this, they can.
I don't know about them, so.
We can do other study sessions, that type of thing.
Interim City Attorney Feldman, did you want to make a comment?
Just with respect to some of the questions earlier about the appeal process, we're really talking about two different kinds of appeal. Right? So we have the first decision by the Community Development Director, and those can be appealed to the Planning Commission. And this is actually true under the current code now, if the final decision at the city level is objected to by the applicant, or in the case under the proposed code, a major plan, an interested party, in addition to the applicant, they have the opportunity to file an appeal in district court under Rule 106 of the Colorado Rules of Civil Procedure, which is an appeal based upon the record, not a de novo, not a new hearing of the case. As far as minimizing the city's risk, I don't think there's a way to minimize it anymore now under a new code than we have under the existing code. An applicant will have a right in any kind of land development decision related to their property where judgment calls are being made by the decision-making body to challenge it in court if they don't like the decision. And we've just set up the process where it's a little bit more administrative, especially for the smaller site plans. And I think one could assume or suspect that we would have less opportunity, that somebody would get to a point where they would want to go to court at the end of that process. But basically the way the code is now and the way the code would be if council approves this amendment, at the end of the city process, an aggrieved applicant would have the ability to go to court.
Thank you. Council, any additional questions? Councilmember Fay.
I have a question for the city manager. From what you know of other cities in Colorado, are we typical where we are right now in not having an appeal process? Or would this, what we're proposing to do now, put us more like other cities or not?
When the city attorney at the time discussed this at the joint meeting, we touched on this issue. This was back in January. In fact, I think staff also replied to this question here just recently here for all the council. There is a wide variety of how cities will involve their citizens. In some cases, as Mike Sutherland has already noted, council can be involved at the very end of all of these. I think in my view, what we're proposing, I think is probably more of a norm where we're allowing some level of engagement for our citizens in the major projects. And I think currently with what we have here under our existing code, in my opinion, is probably not to the city's advantage long term. And I just think this provides kind of a better opportunity for our citizens.
Any additional questions?
One additional question. Where was the 300 feet? What determined that distance from the property?
So the 300 feet, and citizens have commented on that very question. Right. You know, I think if you, our typical notice boundary for public hearing cases is 750 feet. And I think we determined that 300 feet was, rather than the typical notification boundary, it's a little bit of a smaller set to start off with. I think staff was concerned that, you know, one of the citizens proposed a quarter mile, right, which would really open up approvals to a wide variety of people wanting to appeal. That 300 feet, I think, was derived basically on the basis of approximately half of the public notice, the typical public notice boundary, and tried to really focus in on who was most directly affected.
Well, and the letter you're referencing has to do with Columbine Square in District 1, and that area will affect more than just the people within 300 feet. That will affect people, you know, at least in a quarter mile, if not further, with traffic and schooling and that type of thing. So I'm lukewarm on this first go around.
Thank you. And Planning Commission had some concerns about it as well, and recommended that the right-of-way be excluded from that that calculation. And I think an example like Columbine Square, if you happen to be just outside of that, it would be incumbent upon the citizen to work with their neighbors to convince somebody in the area to do an appeal.
Okay.
So
Councilmember Schlechter.
When the right-of-way is excluded, does that mean the 300 feet starts on the opposite side of the road? Is that what that?
That is correct.
Mayor Pro Tem Valdez.
This is an entire rewrite. This is just taking the existing code and just adding a little bit more meat to it and understanding to it who can do what. Am I wrong on that?
No.
This isn't a radical change. I mean, it's just taking the existing codes, adding in some definitions and 300 feet.
I think that's a fair assessment, that we tried to work very tightly with the existing code and add in the provision, add in a provision to allow citizens to appeal certain types of development. So it's
making it a little better for everyone.
Yeah, we're not, the process of site development plans doesn't change very much. We've added some improvements to allow very minor developments to be done as sketch plans or plot plans, which I think will be a great improvement for the development community. But by and large, the process really doesn't change. It's the ability to appeal.
Right, thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Cole.
So if I'm remembering, I've read this several times over the last few days, but keeping it all in here, who knows? If somebody wanted to build something based on this and interfered with the, I forget what we call it, the sun access.
Shadows. Create shadows.
Thank you. But anyway, so you don't have access to the sun. Maybe you even have already solar installation. What happens?
Sunlight and shadow studies can be definitely part of a site development plan review process. And we can look at that during the process, and if a development were to be an extreme case, part of the review standards is to mitigate adverse impacts. And if that was determined to be an adverse impact in that particular case, or was extreme in some level, it's possible that a site development plan could be denied on that basis. I mean, we'd have to really look at it on an individual basis, but.
So it would be based on, like, if I already had solar and something was going up, as opposed to seeing whether a future owner of my property, which currently doesn't have solar, would be impacted. I don't know if I said that right, but
I think I understand. So we would look at it, based on the property. It wouldn't necessarily be tied to a particular ownership, present or future. We would look at it based on the property standards, and then if it were appealed, a planning commission would look at that as well to see, okay, well, what are the existing conditions and how would this affect neighboring properties? And they could make a determination based on an appeal if it were appealed.
But again, that sounds like current, the way property currently is, as opposed to development of more evolving technology. It's an issue that I've raised with what we're looking at for downtown, and I forget, but I've called it the sunshade or whatever. That's not connected directly to this, but it's the same concept of protecting that.
Yeah, I think with our comprehensive plan project, we are going to look at the codes carefully after, assuming the comprehensive plan is adopted. We'll be looking at the codes very carefully to make sure they are consistent with the comprehensive plan. Those types of things could be incorporated into future code amendments or that project in 2020 to see if we need to change our development regulations to do different setbacks in the downtown area, or bulk plane requirements, that type of thing. But it's not included in this ordinance at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so public hearing. We'll open the public hearing at the 7:13. And we have one person signed up, Pam Chadbourne.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. I have a strong interest in this, and this is a missed opportunity to help the city respond to a period of increasing pressure for density and intensity of uses. Continue this to a date certain and remand it back to have staff change it to be more restrictive in the definitions of major SDPs, and change the appeals of zoning code violations to the Board of Adjustment as is required by our city code now, and have staff add an appeals process for violations of city code by city management and for inaction by city council. The claim that this is a cure to the Grove is false. Just categorically and absolutely. The violation with the Grove was that it required rezoning, as was done for a similar project, Broadstone, in 2013. Staff should have processed the Grove as a public quasi-judicial rezoning, and it failed to. The concept that it was an SDP is false, and it never should have brought it that way, and that's what we need to fix. Now, the changes that should be made to these restrictions are reduce the definition of major from 8 multifamily to 3, or alternatively no more than 3 times the number of units found on adjacent properties. And I think that's obvious. If you have 3 neighbors around you, and they all go to 3, you suddenly got 9 neighbors where you used to have 3, and that's a major impact to you. We have a right, we citizens, existing owners, have a right to be able to appeal that. Reduce the definition of major SDP from land greater than 10 acres to any greater than 1.5, and I think that's obvious from recent actions. Increase the distance of property owners with standing to appeal from 300 feet to 750, and include renters and tenants, not just owners. And I can't keep saying this enough, and it keeps being failed to be done. And again, I think that's obvious. Tenants are oftentimes the worst impacted by these kinds of changes. There's a lot of reasons for these. I had to send this late, and I apologize for that. But let's see. So I've already talked about the failure with the Grove was a failure by staff and management to do this, and a failure by City Council for 9 months to interact with the city manager and fix that. Citizens have no recourse when that's done, and that's a fundamental violation of the public trust, and we need recourse. Also, the definition of major is far too loose, and the Board of Adjustment in our code must hear, it has the power to hear and decide appeals relating to Title 10. Then you can add PC, Public Planning Commission, and as was stated, many cities do more approvals of SDPs, and why not? There were only 5 or 6 a year. There's only 5 or 6 a year. We can afford these reviews. Thank you very much for your consideration, City Council.
Okay, no one else has signed up. Does anyone else care to speak? Paul?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Paul Bingham, 236 West Delaware Circle. Having been involved in the lawsuit over the Grove, I recognize this as being a good thing. I think it's just fine, with one exception. I agree with Councilman Driscoll. 300 feet is simply not enough. I would have welcomed being able to appeal the Grove. I would have welcomed being able to appeal the mixed use thing. I don't live 300 feet from either one of these things. I think 300 feet is ridiculous. These things involve the entire city, all of us, not just the people, very few people that are 300 feet from it. So as large as that could be made, I would approve that. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else? Frank? Frank, this needs to be appropriate for the
Pardon me?
hearing. Is this appropriate for the public hearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
My name's Frank Atwood. I live at phone number 720-260-1493. Earlier, I've been asking about the character of Littleton, and I'd like to continue it this evening with what Councilmember Cole has asked of what are Littleton's iconic structures. I'm sure each of you can easily name them. As a beginning list, there's both ends of Main Street, the courthouse and the Carnegie Library. There's Rapp Street that has the Richard Little House on it and the Columbine Mill that started Littleton. There's the Town Hall Arts Center. There's the Rio Grande Depot, which is next to Light Rail, and Santa Fe Depot next to the Buck Center. These are iconic structures that I'm glad to say, with regards to the Carnegie Library, we've continued to protect the visual easement on it, and with regards to the courthouse, we have the Grove. I think one of the things discussed with the envisioning process is that we should avoid uncomfortable transitions, and that they ought to be gradual and increase in mass. I'd suggest that somehow you incorporate maximum differential of 1 story allowed between adjacent properties. And to the phrase I know with regards to solar shade is solar accessibility. And with regards to these, if any of you have been customers recently, granted this is not an iconic structure in Littleton, but the Graceful Cafe, neighbor to the immediate south, which I think is either a 6-plex or 8-plex, is just overwhelming. So thank you very much. I hope that this is applicable, and been a pleasure. Thank you, City Council.
Thank you, Frank. Anybody else? Dawn?
I want your phone number. Thank you.
Good evening again, Council.
dating
I
service.
hadn't planned on talking, but Council Member Driscoll and Council Member Cole's observations are so provocative. I think I have some observations that may be useful. In terms of expanding the parameters for appeal beyond size, I appreciate the concern about iconic structures, but I think the issues involved may be well beyond just iconic, because it might be things that deal with character per se. I could think of many things that would add to Frank's list of iconic structures. So that also triggers concern about the inadequacy of just a football field's length for allowable appeals. I hope that you consider expanding that. But the second question has to do with Council Members Driscoll's questions about adding possible verbiage around the appeals process. I think there may be room for considering an intermediate set of procedures, intermediate remedies that lie somewhere between Planning Commission and the courts. Just to illustrate, at the federal level, citizens can easily file an appeal with the Interior Board of Land Appeals for certain kinds of actions, which provides an easy administrative remedy. It keeps it out of the courts. It facilitates the dialogue between the offended parties and the agency or the governing officials. And it also deals with the question of certitude. It's not just certainty for developers, but it's certainty for citizens in terms of their sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 7:22, and I need a motion, please.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to table ordinance 16-2016 to a future study session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to table to a study session date to be determined. Ready to vote?
The vote is 2 in favor with, well, who didn't vote?
Right.
Kyle, thank you. The vote is 2 in favor with Mayor Pro Tem Valdez, Mayor Brinkman, Councilmember Schlachter, and Councilmember Fay voting no. The motion fails.
Mayor, I move to approve the ordinance amending Littleton City Code Title 10, Chapters 1 and 7 regarding site development plans.
I need a second. We have a second from Mayor Pro Tem Valdez. Council, any conversation, discussion? Councilmember Fay.
I would like to propose an amendment. Is this the time to do it?
Yes.
I propose, I'm going to need some help with the wording, but I propose that we change the distance for appeal eligibility from 300 feet to 750 feet.
Second.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor to change the height or the distance within this ordinance from 300 feet to 750 feet. Any conversation, discussion? Councilmember Schlachter?
I just had a question for Mr. Sutherland. You said this was 750 feet was the typical public hearing
Thanks for the question, because I misspoke on the 750 feet. The actual notification requirement in the code for public hearing processes is 700 feet. And I looked that up to make sure I was correct. I apologize about the misinformation earlier. I did say 750 feet. That is not correct. It is 700 feet. Thank you.
Councilmember Fay, did you have a question, comment?
Question for the city attorney.
Okay.
How would this affect anything else? Would this affect anything else in the ordinance, or apart from just changing that 300 and 750 feet, requiring a developer to notify and allow more people to appeal a major site development plan? Is that the only impact?
Well, if you're just requiring 750, well, first of all, let me back up a step. Given what you just heard from Mr. Sutherland, I'd suggest, right, at least ask you if Councilmember Fay would consider amending your amendment to 700 to be consistent with the requirements in the code for other kinds of notifications.
That would be fine.
All right, and you're okay on the second, Mayor Pro Tem. So, thank you. I'm not clear, based upon the amendment, whether that's 700 feet giving grounds to parties who have the authority to appeal, or whether the intent was also 700 feet parties to get notice of the proceeding if there is an appeal of the administrative action to the Planning Commission. So maybe we can clarify that.
Councilmember Schlachter introduced the concept of notification in this. That wasn't part of the proposed amendment. So my proposed amendment was to change the existing 300 feet for right of appeal to now 700 feet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And notification isn't part of my intent of the amendment.
Okay, so the answer to Councilmember Schlachter's question is no, it would not impact other parts of the code. This simply would apply to who would be qualified to appeal a decision.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments related to this amendment? No? Okay, the amendment is to go from 300 feet for right of appeal to 700 feet for right of appeal. Yes. Ready to vote? Yep.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, so we're back to the main motion as amended. Council, any additional questions or comments?
I have another amendment.
Okay, Councilmember Fay.
I propose that we amend to change the max or the number of units for multifamily from 8 to 4.
Second. I like it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to make for an amendment to change the multifamily units from 8 to 4. Councilmember Fay, you want to share your thoughts on why you want to?
Yes. 8 units is going from 8 units to, let's say, from a single family dwelling like happened at the beside the Graceful Cafe is a large impact, whereas 4 units would be much less impact. It's simply that.
Council. Wait.
So is the intent to make it smaller by volume, square feet, also by height? I mean, if so, I think it would be better to address that than the number of units, because you can still have 4 units that could take up just as much space.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I think I understand where you're going, but it seems to me square foot and height.
Could we do both?
Could, yeah.
On that comment, I was going to propose an amendment with square footage, but not necessarily height on the multifamily residential units. So.
Okay, let's refer to staff. Staff, if we were to do an amendment changing the multifamily units from 8 to 4, and then an amendment which would affect the square feet, what would can you give us kind of your thoughts on that, a recommendation? Are we making it worse or better? Because we can do that.
My thought on that, I think with the study session we had originally discussed 4 units as part of the multifamily development. In the study session, there was some discussion of that number and how that would affect developments that are occurring right now. My thought is that reducing it by that much, it may be worth doing some additional study on this and maybe some additional outreach to see how that proposed change would work with not only our citizens, who I think would be very happy about that, but with the development community, how would they feel about that? So the city manager may want to jump in on that. That's my initial thought, but
Is there a way to balance it by an amendment with square feet?
So it is possible with the square footage amendment. There'd been some discussion about having maybe 15,000 square feet associated with 8 units. Forgive me. And how that would affect the ordinance. If you choose square footage that's really large, it makes the square footage irrelevant compared to the units. If you choose something that's too small, I think you may as well say, well, all multifamily development should be a major site development plan. So we'd have to kind of look at that carefully. I guess with 8 units and 15,000 square feet, we thought, oh, that might work pretty well. If you halved that and said 4 units and 7,500 square feet, just as one individual, I'm really not sure exactly what the impacts might be there, and what the unintended consequences might be.
Okay. City manager.
I'd recommend that the council first start with a number of units and decide if you want to drop that from, say, 8 to 4 as being proposed. Then I would move on to a discussion about square footage. I might have to agree with Mike Sutherland. I'm not sure what the square footage number, what that would get you, other than some threshold that I'd have to admit would probably be somewhat arbitrary as we're working through here this evening. But I think the number of units is probably going to be more meaningful here in the long run. I think that's going to really dictate kind of this major and minor division. So again, we may want to comment depending on where the council discussion goes on the square footage, but let's first deal with the units.
Okay, and just as a order of business for council, this is similar to what we did at our last regular meeting, where we can take an issue of this ordinance and take it to a study session after staff has had some time to kind of analyze it and work through it, and this may be one of those where that might be appropriate, particularly with the square footage, instead of trying to amend something where we may, as you said, have some unintended consequences. So we can go into a study session, have a conversation about this, staff can have some homework done, and then we can put it back in and amend our ordinance in the near future, next month or so. Councilmember Fay and then Councilmember Schlechter.
Comment on what both of those statements said when we had Brett Keast talk a few weeks ago. He's a nationally known community character planner type person. He said that Littleton is in a position where we can ask for from developers what we want, and I think that's where you were getting at. Citizens would probably like this reduction, development community might not. he said that Littleton is clearly in a position where what we need to do is define what it is we want. And we can have that, and in fact, we will be respected in the development community for having made it clear what our expectations are. So I'm sorry, that's Keith's opinion, not mine, but I do agree with it. For number of units versus square footage, I guess hearing a few comments here, what I really had in mind was 8 units of people is a whole lot more cars and commotion and coming and going and noise versus half that. And so my primary concern behind this proposed amendment really is number of units. I do like the idea of looking at square footage. Councilmember Schlechter.
With regard to the 8 verse 4, any site development plan that comes before staff, whether it's 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, however many, it still must conform to the allowable zoning in that area. So this isn't necessarily saying we're not allowing anything larger than 8, but it's just the making it something that's a major site development versus a minor, and providing more opportunity, for better or worse, for residents to appeal or, you know, express their concern for a development. And so I mean, I think in a zone that's, someplace that's R5 that could allow, you know, whatever that it can go to, having a unit that's 6 in there may not, to me, rise to the level of a major site development. It still goes through this process. Is that correct?
That is correct. I agree with your analysis. This does not change the proposed ordinance, whether 8 units, 4 units, whatever it is, does not change any zoning requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions on the amendment we have on the floor? Okay, the amendment on the floor is to change the multifamily units from 8 to 4. Ready to vote?
The vote is 5 in favor, with Councilmember Schlachter voting no. The motion carries.
Okay,
And then, Mayor, can we follow that up with the study session?
absolutely.
Okay.
City Manager,
Yeah,
thank you.
height is the most interesting part. I think, as Frank had even mentioned, if it's more than one story, that's an interesting thought.
That is.
Yeah. Councilmember Schlechter.
I would like to make an amendment with regard to the square footage here tonight, just, you know, just to have it out there, because I don't think it is going to restrict anything. And I'll explain my rationale after this. So I move to amend ordinance number 16, 2019 by removing point number 2 under the definition of site development plan major within subsection 10-1-2 on page 1 of Exhibit A, and replacing it with 2, period, all multifamily development in any zone district containing more than, I guess it's 4.
Well, we haven't
Did we?
approved the main motion yet, so
Well,
it would change.
But we voted on that.
we voted on that.
But we haven't approved the main motion.
Okay.
So the amendment, it would be an amended main motion.
Okay, would be
But
4.
it'll fix when
It'll
you
fix,
do
yeah,
it.
4 dwelling units, or,
That's we haven't figured out.
I'm going to stick with the same square footage here. It's more than 15,000 square feet of combined total gross floor area, regardless of the number of buildings or number of lots within the development project.
Per unit is what? For 15?
Total development, 15,000.
Oh, 1,000 you said. Okay.
15,000 square feet. So, I mean,
Councilmember Driscoll.
He needs a second first.
Oh, yeah, we need a second on that amendment.
So I have a question.
Nope, we need a second first. No second, dies for lack of a second. Okay, we're back to the main motion as amended. Any other comments or questions? Okay. I'm actually going to support this. I think that this is a really good step in towards involving and engaging the community in a process that really they were not able to in the past. And so we did see a lot of strife and a lot of conflict, and a lot of that was really because they wanted to have a voice in some of these issues. And the way we had it set up, there was not a public process around this. And so I think when you're talking about land use, and when you're talking about things that are next to you, and you're talking about whether it be commercial or residential, whether it be 4, 6, 8 stories, or 300 apartments, a community, the neighborhoods are special because people care so deeply about their neighborhoods, and they care so deeply about what's happening next to them and across the street from them. And I think not having a voice in that, a larger voice than there was current with this particular process. Of course, rezones and stuff like that, it's a very large and vibrant public process for that. So I think this is a really good first step, and this is something that as we go along and we see areas of this that can be improved and can be adjusted, and a lot of that will come from the public and things that we're learning through walking through this process. I think that it is only going to make us a better community, and I think it does blend well. Someone was talking about the comp plan and how this kind of and Keist and those types, the kind of the trajectory we're on with that, and I think this aligns with that real nicely, and I think that's important for us to keep that in mind, is that we need to continue to keep our decisions that we make outside of the comp plan aligning with our comp plan. So this has got my thumbs up on this one. So, Council, any additional comments? Ready to,
I think the amendments we just adopted are for the positive. I feel like this can still go deeper, and again, it goes back to lawsuits and trying to avoid those at all cost. We have an opportunity, and just the fact that we can discuss this a little bit more, but this is a step in the right direction, and I too will support this.
Great. Councilmember Schlechter.
Yeah, I think a comment that staff made in an email that described this ordinance very well, that the intent of this ordinance is to, encourage small businesses and small developments with a administrative process to bring things to the city and add development, but at the same time, provide a voice to citizens that have concerns about specifically large projects. And while I didn't necessarily support the amendment to lower it from multi-unit from 8 to 4, I still do support this ordinance and will be voting for it.
Excellent. Other comments? Ready to vote? This is a vote on the main motion as amended. Does anybody need to have it repeated?
The vote is 5 in favor, with Councilmember Cole voting no. The motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Council. Next on our agenda is comments and reports. City Manager.
No report, Mayor.
Interim City Attorney.
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Fay.
This Saturday, we have a District 3 meeting. Anybody is welcome to attend, don't have to be a resident of District 3. And it will be 9:30 at the Wilmore Garden Center. That's at 711 County Line Road. Issues that we'll talk about and have citizen participation in, if they want, are interim fix for Mineral and Santa Fe traffic, which is coming. Conditional use for shooting ranges, hot topic, and proposed construction for the east end of the Oak Brook Shopping Center, which is going to be a veterinary emergency clinic, and it conforms to zoning. So we will talk about that and anything else people want to talk about.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Schlechter.
Briefly, in the last week, I think it was, both Councilmember Driscoll and I attended the groundbreaking ceremony for Alpine Buick GMC down County Line and Santa Fe down there. It was a great event there. And we attended on Friday the ribbon cutting grand opening for Bacon Social House, which is on Littleton and Bemis. So great restaurant, good menu. So look forward to dining there.
Excellent. Councilmember Cole.
No report.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Yep, Kyle stole some of my comments, but I also want to acknowledge Kelly Nardi and her staff for producing Visit Littleton. These are magazines that will be placed in around the city and hotels and that type of stuff. Really well done, Kelly and staff. And that's it.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Valdez.
Yes, and thank you to the applicants came out for the boards and commissions, second round that we went through. We had some great applicants. Unfortunately, not everybody can be placed onto a board or commission that are very qualified. It was a tough decision, but congratulations to those that were appointed. That's it.
Okay.
Can we just congratulate Councilmember Valdez on his retirement? Did that happen recently? Isn't it?
It did.
It did? Congratulations.
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 Well, it's just my 9 to 5.
Oh, okay. Well,
9 to 5. The rest of
the rest of it, okay, that's, sorry, I should be clear with that.
Exactly.
Okay, I have no report. So we need a motion. We're going to move into a recess to an executive session.
Mayor? I move to recess to an executive session for the purpose of holding a conference with City Council and appropriate staff under Charter, Article 3, Section 27, Paren 5, and Section 24-6-402, Paren 4, Paren F, CRS, to consider a personal matter considering the city manager's annual review. Sorry. I further move to return to an open meeting at the close of the executive session for the purpose of taking any formal action deemed necessary.
Got
it.
Who seconded? Councilmember Driscoll seconded. So we have a motion and a second. Ready to vote?
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Glad we all can agree.
Will be Bach.
return to session, and we are going to take no additional business this evening, no additional action this evening, so we are adjourned.